Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology to try and help you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. And last time we were talking about the diary of Anne Frank, where she was keeping her diary during the Holocaust of her, going through adolescence. And how that has been something that has gone, throughout history, as, a kind of guide for, how people can live through trauma and come through trauma, and still have some kind of a, positive outlook. So we're going to take back up on that. Anne originally had regarded Peter as shy and gawky, a not very promising companion. But eventually she began visiting his attic room for longer, intimate talks, and finally her first kiss. So Peter was her first kiss. When they were younger, she didn't think all that much of it. But as she started changing, these feelings come up when our hormones are kicking. So she started having these feelings about Peter. Her diary records the conflict between her stirring sexual passion and her strict moral upbringing. So, kind of the same thing we all go through at that age. The hormones are telling us one thing, and our upbringing and parents are telling us another thing. One of the last diary entries is dated July 15th, 1944. Less than 3 weeks before the raid and 8 months before Anne's death in the concentration camp at Bergen-Belsen. And it goes like this: in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. And if you can imagine that, having gone through this and still having the belief that people are good at heart. I mean, she was truly a good person. I hear the ever-approaching thunder, which will destroy us too. I can feel the suffering of millions, and yet, if I look up into the heavens, I think that it will all come right, that this cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. And so that's very sad, because she didn't make it out of the concentration camp. And millions of people did die, and there was good that came out of it in that, we got involved in the war was stopped, Nazi Germany came to an end for the most part. Of course, we have the little neo-Nazis here and there, but for the most part, it was a lesson that the world will never forget. The moving story of Anne Frank's tragically abbreviated adolescence points up the insistent role of biology and is interrelationships with inner and outer experience. Because, you can feel a certain way inside, and your outer reality might be completely different than what you're feeling. And that is, some cognizant dissonance that teenagers have to work out for themselves. Anne's coming of age occurred under highly unusual conditions. Yeah, I would say so. Yet her normal physical maturation went on, along with a host of cognitive and psychosocial changes heightened by her stressful circumstances. Because, needless to say, she was living in a stressful circumstance, and her mind had to wrap around that as well as what was happening to her. Turning to cognitive development, we examine the Piagetian stage of formal operations, which makes it possible for a young person like Anne Frank to visualize an ideal world. Because before that, you're just thinking maybe about what you want and how things are. But when you start into adolescence, you think of how you would like things to be. You can imagine an ideal world, that you would make. And a lot of us do. We also look at some immature aspects of adolescence through and at their linguistic and moral development, because In adolescence, you're not fully developed yet. You're still immature in your thinking, and your moral code is on shaky ground because, like I say, the hormones are filling you, and those impulses want to ride out that moral reasoning. Finally, we explore practical aspects of cognitive growth, issues of education and vocational choice, which continue to concern Anne Frank no matter how narrowly circumscribed her life became, because she was always thinking about what's going to happen when this is over. For her, it never was, which is a shame. But, all adolescents are thinking about that. What am I to do when I get out of high school? And that's something you have to figure out for yourself. So, in modern industrial societies, the passage from childhood to adulthood is marked by a long transitional period known as adolescence. Adolescence is generally considered to begin with puberty, the process that leads to sexual maturity or fertility, the ability to reproduce. And that is, if you have a healthy adolescence and you come through it, there are people who can't have children for one reason or another, but we're talking about the averages here. Adolescence lasts from about age 11 or 12 until the late teens or early 20s, and it entails major interrelated changes in all realms of development. Your spiritual, your mental, your emotional, your physical, all that is going to get some tweaks in your adolescence. Adolescence is a social construction. Before the 20th century, there was no concept of adolescence. Children in Western cultures entered the adult world when they matured physically or when they began a vocational apprenticeship. So there was no such thing as adolescence back then. When a woman started menstruating at probably age 12, she was a woman. And a boy, once he started producing, ejaculating, got some mustache happening, he was declared a man. He was given an apprenticeship or, had to go work. So, fortunately, we know a little bit more nowadays, but in the past, that's how people were treated. Today, entry into adulthood takes longer, got a little ear itch here, sorry, and is less clear cut. Because we know there's a space of time there when you're going from being a kid to an adult, when you're still navigating the world and you need that time. Puberty begins earlier than it used to, and entrance into a vocation tends to occur later. Since complex societies require longer periods of education or vocational training before a young person can take on adult responsibilities. So we've learned that these young people are not necessarily adults and aren't going to make great adult decisions because they're not there yet, So we have learned that our teenagers are not grown-ups just because they start looking more like a grown-up. Contemporary U.S. society has a variety of markers of entrance into adulthood. There are legal definitions. At 17, young people may enlist in the armed forces. At age 18, in most states, they may marry without their parents' permission. At 18 to 21, depending on the state, they may enter into binding contracts. Using sociological definitions, people may call themselves adults when they are self-supporting or have chosen a career, have married or formed a significant relationship, or have started a family. And we know from the case of Macaulay Culkin, it's a famous case, where he declared himself an emancipated minor, and the courts let him do it because he had his own money, he was, functioning, and his parents were kind of skimming off the top, so to speak. So he wanted a divorce from his parents, basically, and he got it. And some 16-year-olds and older mature enough where they can do that. So it just depends on the case. There also are psychological definitions. Cognitive maturity is often considered to coincide with the capacity for abstract thought. So, you could be mentally mature and still not be physically mature. And sometimes kids who come up with a rough upbringing kind of hit that mark. Emotional maturity may depend on such achievements as discovering one's identity, becoming independent of parents, developing a system of values, and forming relationships. And that's a hallmark of a functioning person. Some people never leave adolescence, no matter what their chronological age, and that's unfortunate. I know of people who kind of got stuck there, and they're still immature and not being productive members of society. And it's not all about the money. A lot of people think it's all about the money. You can still be a productive member of society even if you're volunteering or doing something. Because I'm physically disabled, I can't go out there and work a job. That'd be great because I'd have a lot more money, but I can't. So I'm here, trying to teach like I did when I was teaching adult ed on the internet. So, I'm still trying to be a functional member of society instead of sitting on my booty being depressed and saying, oh, well. Early adolescence, approximately ages 11 to 12 or 14, the transition out of childhood offers opportunities for growth, not only in physical dimensions, but also cognitive and social competence, autonomy, self-esteem, and intimacy. So all these things are a hallmark of things that we have to navigate in the adult world. This period also carries great risks. Some young people have trouble handling so many changes at once and may need help in overcoming dangers along the way. Like I said, growing up's hard, and not everybody can do it as well as everybody else. And so if your child is not navigating adolescence and they need some help, don't be ashamed to step in and help them out. They need the help. Step in and help them out. Let them get the help they need. Excuse me, there's no shame in that. Adolescence is a time of increasing divergence between the majority of young people who are headed for a fulfilling and productive adulthood and a sizable minority, about 1 out of 5, who will be dealing with major problems. So 1 in 5 teenagers are going to be dealing with major problems, either the way they were brought up, trauma, or they just aren't up to the task of being an adult. U.S. adolescents today face greater hazards to their physical and mental well-being than did their counterparts in earlier years. Now, you wouldn't think that was true, but because of the industrialization of society, it is. Among these hazards are early pregnancy and childbearing, because the kids are alone more nowadays because the parents are at work. Ain't no chaperones following them around anymore. And high death rates from accidents, homicide, and suicide. Behavior patterns that contribute to these risks, such as heavy drinking, drug abuse, sexual and gang activity, motorcycles without helmets, and use of firearms, are established early in adolescence. So these are things to look out for. If you notice your kid is kind of dabbling in some things that may be a little risky, say, hey, you know what, I've noticed, no, how about we don't do that? We're not going to have that here. And you are a parent. You have the right to say that. We're not having that in this house, not happening. However, a government survey shows encouraging trends. Recent declines in 9th to 12th graders' tobacco and marijuana use, risky sexual behavior, carrying of weapons, and riding in cars without seat belts or with drivers who have been drinking. They are diminishing such risky behaviors, and this increases the chances that young people will come through the teenage years in good physical and mental health. So those messages that they're going into school and doing little talks to kids and giving them the scare tactics is working a little bit. I remember when I was in school, there were kids actively sticking joints in the middle of cigarettes and smoking them right there out in the smoking area. Because when I was in school, we had a smoking area. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that, kids nowadays? The biological changes of puberty, which signal the end of childhood, result in rapid growth in height and weight, changes in body proportion and form, and attainment of sexual maturity. So, the physical is changing too, and that's a big deal. That's where kids start having some problems, is when the physical is changing and they feel a little, oh no, what's happening to my body, and sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. These dramatic physical changes are part of a long, complex process of maturation that begins even before birth, and their psychological ramifications continue into adulthood. Puberty begins with a sharp increase in production of sex hormones. Needless to say, first, sometime between age 5 and 9, the adrenal glands begin secreting larger amounts of androgens, which will play a part in the growth of pubic, axillary, that's your underarm hair, and facial hair. So, between this age, we're getting ready to start being hairy. Girls, get those razors ready. And boys too, if you're shaving. A few years later, in girls, the ovaries step up their output of estrogen, which stimulates growth of female genitals and development of breasts. And this is a hard time for a girl, because, most of the time they don't develop evenly at the same time. And you're always concerned about them. Are people looking? Are people noticing? I know, probably due to the fact that I was being molested, mine started to develop around the age of 8, and the only other girl in our school who was also wearing a training bra around the age of 8 was one of the most popular girls, the most popular girl in our class. So when we were changing for gym, other girls noticed we were wearing the training bra, and laughing at us, making fun of us, popping it, telling the boys, she got on a training bra, and of course then the boys have to do it. So it's rough for girls when that starts happening. In boys, the testes increase the manufacture of androgens, particularly testosterone, which stimulate growth of male genitals, muscle mass, and body hair. So the boys start, getting larger parts of their bodies and more hair. Boys and girls have both types of hormones, but girls have higher levels of estrogen and boys have higher levels of androgen. In girls, testosterone influence growth of the clitoris, as well as the bones and of pubic and axillary hair. So the more testosterone a female has in her, the more manly, hairy, angular looking she's going to be. That's just unfortunate too. My grandma told me, you got some Italian in you. Italian women, once they go through menopause, they get mustaches. And she wasn't wrong, I shaved mine off because I started getting this little black mustache. I was like, oh no, my grandma was right. So, the precise time when this burst of hormonal activity begins seems to depend on reaching a critical weight level. So it's usually around that 100-pound mark. That's usually when the kids will start to blossom. So, you start approaching that, 80 to 100-pound window there. That's when the kids will start blooming. Studies of mice and humans show that leptin, a protein hormone secreted by fatty tissue and identified as having a role in obesity, is needed to trigger the onset of puberty. So, bet you didn't know your puberty had anything to do with fat, did you? But it does. There's that little magic window that tells your genetic code oh, we're this big now, we're ready to start doing puberty. And it turns that switch on. An accumulation of leptin in the bloodstream may stimulate the hypothalamus, a structure at the base of the brain, to send pulsating signals to the nearby pineal and pituitary glands, which in turn may signal the sex glands to increase their secretion of hormones. So the brain decides, okay, we're going to do this now. It tells these glands that are in charge of this, let's do it, and next thing you know, you're seeing hair down there. This may explain why overweight girls tend to enter puberty earlier than thin girls. And now, I was a thin girl, but like I said, I was molested, so that might be why I started to blossom a little earlier than the average girl. But I did not start having, menstruation until I was 12, so that at least, held off for a while. Some research attributes the heightened emotionality and moodiness of early adolescence, so apparent in Anne Frank's diary, to hormonal changes. Like I said, we're being filled with hormones. That affects your brain, your body, everything. And, I mean, if you've ever had, to take hormones, or if you were someone who suffered from, like, maybe PMS, you know that you're not your best and you're not making your best decisions when you're being flooded with hormones. However, other influences, such as gender, age, temperament, and the timing of puberty, may moderate or even override hormonal ones. So, everything is not an excuse because your hormones are kicking. That's certainly going to have an effect, but you need to teach young people that they have to use their brains as well. Hormones seem more strongly related to moods in boys than in girls. And see, that surprised me when I was learning that, and I bet that surprises you too, boys. Hormones make boys more moody than they do girls. So when boys are being filled with testosterone, that's why you guys get all macho and, like that. Yeah, you can't really make fun of the girls. Sorry. And especially in early adolescents, who are still adjusting to pubertal changes. This is why boys have a bad attitude in adolescence. Parents of boys, if your boy didn't give you some trouble and have a bad attitude, sometimes you got lucky. Trust me. There is about a 7-year range for the onset of puberty in both boys and girls. The process typically takes about 4 years for both sexes and begins about 2 or 3 years earlier in girls than in boys. So yes, girls mature faster than boys. We knew that, didn't we, girls? Physical changes in both boys and girls during puberty include the adolescent growth spurt, the development of pubic hair, a deeper voice, and muscular growth. So yes, a girl's voice even gets deeper. It evens out, because if you remember when you're a little girl, you probably talk like that, but most of us, outgrow that. Hopefully. I've heard some women that I think, gosh, how was your voice when you were a kid, You sound like Minnie Mouse. The maturation of reproductive organs brings the beginning of ovulation and menstruation in girls and the production of sperm in boys. So, now here's where some dudes get confused. They think the first time they have ejaculate, they're a man, But you don't actually start producing sperm until a little bit later into adolescence. So, These changes unfold in a sequence that is much more consistent than their timing. Stuff happens awkwardly. Like, one of my sons developed this really big nose during adolescence, and thankfully he grew into it. Now his nose is actually a little, smaller than average. So, you know, um, stuff happens and we feel gawky and awkward, and it's just part of growing up. You know, tell those kiddos it's just part of growing up. And if people made fun of you when you were growing up, that's a shame, but it happens to all of us. So, you know, it was happening to them kids too. They just probably didn't show it maybe as much as you did. Though it does vary somewhat, one girl, for example, may be developing breasts and body hair at about the same rate. In another, body hair may grow so fast that it shows an adult pattern in a year or so before her breasts develop. So, like I said, it's not one set thing for everybody. Different things, happen. You know, uh, you know, sometimes the top grows first and then the bottom. Sometimes in the reverse. It just depends. Similar variations occur among boys. On the basis of historical sources, developmental scientists have found a secular trend, or a trend that, spans several generations, in the onset of puberty. A lowering of the age when puberty begins and when young people reach adult height and sexual maturity. The trend, which also involves increases in adult height and weight, began about 100 years ago and has occurred in the United States, Western Europe, and Japan. The most likely explanation seems to be a higher standard of living. So, where there's more affluence, the child matures faster. And that happens in nature. If you'll notice, where there's more food, the baby animals will grow faster. So, that's just nature right there. Children who are healthier, better nourished, and better cared for mature earlier and grow bigger. Thus, the average age of sexual maturity is earlier in industrialized countries than in less developed ones. So, because in industrialized countries you can care for the children better, they develop faster. Because nature wants us all to grow and reproduce. It's kind of contrary to its own, benefit. It's detrimental for humans to grow and reproduce. Look at the planet. But that's how nature has it. The more food you can get, the better the environment is, the faster the child will grow and mature. The more detrimental the environments. If you think about, Africa, there they was talking. Well, I think they'll talk about it later in here too. That they develop slower. That they may be even 14 to 16 before they start, becoming mature, because the environment is harsh. So the better environment you're in, the faster you're going to develop. In the United States, the average age for boys entry into puberty is 12, but boys may begin to show changes at any time between 9 and 16. Girls, on average, begin to show pubertal changes at 8 to 10 years of age. Some girls begin to show breast budding and pubic hair as early as age 6. For African American girls, or 7 for white girls, and as late as 14. African American girls, who tend to be heavier than white girls, enter puberty about a year earlier. Overweight is associated with early puberty, especially in white 6 to 9-year-old girls. So the more heavy set the child is, the earlier they're going to start in puberty, because they're being well fed, they're nourished, and the body's like, okay, we've reached this milestone, let's start this. One research team found a link between early female puberty and a gene that controls the breakdown of the male hormone testosterone. A reduction in a girl's testosterone level may trigger breast development. So that's kind of an odd thing, but there it is. Let's see, the adolescent growth spurt. In Anne Frank's diary, she made rueful references to her physical growth, to shoes she could no longer get into, and vests so small that they don't even reach my tummy. And apparently was in the adolescent growth spurt, a rapid increase in height and weight. which generally begin in girls between ages 9.5 and 14.5, usually at about 10, and in boys between 10.5 and 16, usually at 12 or 13. The growth spurt typically lasts about 2 years. Soon after it ends, the young person reaches sexual maturity. So when that kid starts shooting up, at the end of that shooting up, they're going to start becoming a man or a woman, whether you like it or not. Sorry. Since girls' growth spurts usually occur earlier than that of the boys, girls between ages 11 and 13 are taller, heavier, and stronger than boys of the same age. As like I said, in middle school, most of us girls were bigger than the boys. The boys would catch us up and pass us up in high school, but in middle school, most of the boys were shorter than us. Muscular growth peaks at age 12.5 for girls and 14.5 for boys. After their growth spurt, boys are again larger than girls, as before. Both boys and girls reach virtually their full height by age 18, and that's in general for everybody. And that's where I'm going to leave you today. I hope you maybe learned out something a little bit more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this video so we can spread this educational program around the world. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube page, channel. And yeah, I know my kids laugh at me when I make these little mistakes, but it's like, I'm old. We didn't have computers when I was a kid. But if you want to help me out even more, go on my Patreon page and become a patron. But that's all for now. Until next time.